All right, if you're a college or university professor, then there's a good chance that you'll wind up doing some sort of advising. So this is part of either teaching or service, depending on how your college or university breaks this up. So by advising, I mean meeting with students to talk about their schedule, building their course list, talking with them about graduation, career goals, things like that. So it really doesn't apply to teaching per se. So you have what you cover in the classroom. This is meeting with students outside of the classroom to talk about their identity as students, where they see themselves going, what some of their goals and priorities are, and so on. So when I first started teaching at the college level, I had to also be an advisor. So I was given between 40 and 70 students that I had to meet with at the beginning of the semester, and then throughout the semester to talk about their schedule. And I had no experience doing this. I had no idea what I was doing. In fact, the very first day that I worked, this was 2 days before the semester began. I had prepared my classes, I had my syllabi ready to go. I had even written some assessments. I had like the first 2 months down, and then I had to meet with other faculty in an advising center, and I was told that you're going to be spending the next 8 hours advising students who are here to register for their classes that semester. And I was thinking, what on earth are you expecting me to do? I don't even know what courses we offer here. So the dean handed me a course catalog and said, this will be your guide. So I sat down maybe 10 minutes before students started coming in. And I have to tell you, there were hundreds of students waiting in a line outside the building. So I walked past them. They must have gotten there at like 7 a.m. to camp out a spot so they could be sure to get registered for the classes. Something like 60% of students registered that day each semester, so right before the semester began. So this was one of the biggest advising days of, since it was fall semester, one of the biggest advising days of the year. And I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. So the 10 minutes before students got there, that was enough time for me to find where the general education requirements were. And so I saw that students needed to register for like a reading or a writing class, a math class, a science lab, a social science course, and so on. So I could see about 60 credits that all students had to get, and so there were categories that they could choose from. And I thought, all right, so that's what I'll be focusing on. But if I have a question about prerequisites, or if I have a question about whether or not this course sequence will lead to a specific degree or to a specific career path, I had no idea. So I remember like the first couple of students that came in, I had this course catalog. It was maybe like 2 inches thick. And the students had access to this too. It was online. And I was worried what questions they might ask. But they sat down and they said, what do I need to register for? It's like, well, have you seen the list in the catalog? And they're like, no, there's a list in the catalog. And so I went through it. Do you have an English class yet? And they say, I don't know. Like, can you look up my transcript? And so I opened my laptop and I asked a colleague, like, how do we look up students' transcripts? And like I typed it in and I could see all the courses they had taken. Sometimes they brought their transcript in or could have it printed off next door. And so I was just looking at their transcript and saying, well, if I were you, here's what I would do. And I did that for 8 hours that first day. And to my knowledge, I only made one significant mistake, which was suggesting a science lab that overlapped with another science lab the student had already taken, so they couldn't take both of them. They had to get that corrected in their schedule, so it wasn't a long-term problem. I did hear horror stories of students who had actually taken the same class a second time because their advisor had suggested it. And so meanwhile, like, you're a grown adult who's registered for a course that you've already passed, and you're blaming your advisor. So in other words, the advising job, or the advising part of the job description, really isn't rocket science. What you're doing is meeting with students. You are the second check that they go through before they register for their classes. And there's a bunch of opportunities you have to build rapport with students, to learn a little bit more about what student goals are, how they see their college or university experience feeding into career goals, but also personal goals. Um, and what I want to do in this video is tell you a little bit about what my experience has been, what some, I guess, tips that I've learned throughout the years that I can share with you that will hopefully make your advising experience a little bit easier, and then just give a bunch of suggestions that you can pick and choose from. My goal here isn't to give you advice about what you should do. I'm going to weigh in on what I do and why I do it, and you can pick and choose from that. But the first thing that I want to say is I really like the faculty advisor role. And so some universities have full-time advisors. They come in and like you're meeting with someone who's an expert on advising in a curriculum. Now, when I first started, I thought that would make a lot more sense than hiring somebody who has a specialty in a discipline and then having them counsel students on advising. Wouldn't it make more sense to train someone in how to do that particular process? But there are some strengths, I think, to having faculty play a part-time role as advisors. And the first is that I feel like it breaks down the barrier between student and faculty. Now, some faculty may not like that. They want to seem out of touch. They might like to seem at a different level, and students should not deign to speak with me outside of classroom time. But I like the idea that students can stop by and speak with me about something that I am not an expert in. I'm just a guy that's looking at the curriculum with them or their degree progress with them, saying things like, I'm not really sure how to do that, but let's figure that out together. And problem solving with them, not being the problem solver, not being the expert, but simply being someone who is an advocate for them, who will do things on their behalf, do things with them, but encourage them to make their choices and grow as a result. So I really like that role. I don't want it to be my full-time gig because then I'll become an expert. I like being a non-expert. I like being somebody who is mystified when a policy changes. And so students can be frustrated and I'll be frustrated with them because, oh, I thought I had this figured out and apparently I don't. There's something new. So I like the honesty of that. And it gives me an opportunity, like I said earlier, to build relationships with some of my students and hear some problems that I otherwise wouldn't. So in the classroom, I don't hear about financial aid problems. I don't hear about registration issues. Students are either in the class or they're not. And then we start talking about coursework when I'm in the classroom. But in my office, I hear a lot more about the roundedness of my students. So I do appreciate that. All right, so the very first step about how to become an advisor is to get the course catalog. Like I said earlier, my first experience doing academic advising, I was in pretty good shape with nothing but the course catalog that I had never even seen before. And so there was a nice thumb guide that I could skip to different areas. I quickly discovered the gen ed courses that all students had to take, and then the psychology major specific courses that students could choose from and how that degree was made. You'll want to study the gen eds. You'll want to study the major sequences. And so if you're a psychology professor like me, then you'll pick out what a student needs to get their psychology degree and then what they need to get their gen ed degree. Sometimes those things are paired together or sometimes they're separate in the catalog, but those are two really important places to look. If you are advising first-year students, which means they haven't taken any courses yet, or they've only taken a few advanced placement courses, the gen ed course list will be really important. If you're advising latter or students who are later in their academic degree progress, you'll probably want to study more the major sequence. And so for psychology, there's like an order of courses that students have to take before they can graduate. And they need to get started with that really early. And so there's a predictable sequence they can go through, and I can advise them through that. So make sure you check out the gen eds and major sequences. Also see or take a look at where to find minor options. So if you're a 4-year degree granting institution, there's usually an 18-credit minor that students can apply for in a related discipline or maybe just a discipline they're interested in. And so there will be rules about how to put that together. So you want to make sure you don't need to have that all known in advance. You'll acquire that as time goes on, but you want to make sure you know how to find it. And so maybe do a search, test yourself, um, and so you can have some of those questions answered in advance. What else? Oh, pass and fail thresholds. So what does a student need to get in a writing course in order to pass that course, or college algebra in order to pass that course? If a student doesn't want to take college algebra or they failed it, is there an alternative course that they can take? What happens to courses once you've failed? Um, is that injury to their GPA corrected by taking it again and passing it? Make sure you know where to find policies like that. But again, don't feel like you have to have all those answers on that first day. Remember, at least from my perspective, you're not an advising expert. You are a scholar. You are a faculty member. You're a professor. That's your expertise. That's what you're actually being hired to do. In the advising capacity, you get to be a non-expert. You get to work with students. Now, that doesn't mean I don't know how to do that. Figure it out yourself. You're there as a tool. You're a much better tool in the classroom, possibly, or doing whatever it is you've been trained to do. But you can still develop that tool as an advisor, your advising skill, during those hours that you're going to spend advising. And it really isn't like 40 or 30, even 30% of your occupation. It's probably factored in 20, 25%, maybe less, depending on the size of school you're at and how many other advisors are there. So give yourself the freedom to solve problems on the fly. So if a student comes in and they say, I've failed this class 3 times, does that mean I can't take it anymore, or do I have to take a year off? And say, oh, that's a really important thing to consider. Let's see if we can't answer that together. And so you make a phone call to the dean or make a phone call to registrar, and it's really neat, or I imagine it's really neat for a student to like voice a problem, and what you're doing is showing them that you don't know the answer, but it's possible to find an answer. And so as I get into this a little bit more, I'm thinking of my relationship to these students in an advising capacity as one of mentorship, where I'm not doing things for them, I'm supporting them doing them themselves. That's a lot of them. I'm supporting students solving these problems on their own, which begins with me showing them that they can be solved, and then saying, here's what I would do, why don't you do it? And then finally, how would you solve that problem? Over 4 years, I'm hoping that opportunity, that freedom, that autonomy to solve their own problems with my support will extend to other areas in their life. And ideally, by their junior and senior year, they're not even talking to me about it. They're saying, oh, by the way, like I have to keep you in the loop because you're my advisor, but here's what I just did. And I made this change, this to that, and I've already applied for graduation, and I know when to expect the fees and what the fees are going to be, and they've already solved all that in advance, and that's way ahead of where they were on day one when they said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, please do it for me, which is what they're used to doing in high school. All right, so I'll get to a little bit more of the specifics about some of those things you want to study in advance, some of those details that you want to know before you actually get started, or what resources to have with you. All right, so a question that comes up a lot with newer colleagues or younger colleagues has to do with the relationship between advisor and advisee, whether or not it's appropriate to counsel them. So this is, like as a psychology professor, I often get students who come in and want to talk about depression or anxiety, sometimes suicidal ideations. And so I suspect non-psychology professors get this too. You've already lowered the bar, or rather you've broken down the barrier of student faculty, and you are seen as this expert, but are you an expert in psychiatry or psychotherapeutic treatment? That's a question that you'll have to answer yourself. So whether it's ethical for you to counsel your students in that capacity. As a psychology professor, I do not think that it's ethical for me to do that, since I don't have certification to do so. Not that I would want to. And so that comes with some of my own opinions about psychology and psychotherapy, which I've gone into in my books, which you're welcome to look at. And perhaps if I get a question about it, I'll make a video about that as well. But remember, the job of the advisor is to act as a consultant for students about their courses. Once you start getting into personal problems, I found it easiest and most effective, I would also suspect, to encourage students to go to the counseling center. If you have a therapist on staff, I've walked students there frequently. I'm very clear that that's not my role and it's not something I've been trained to do. I'm not certified to do it, but I'm happy to walk you down and get that started for you, or put you in touch with a therapist or someone at the university that specializes in the problem that you've just described. So, in terms of psychiatric or personal issues, that's the route I generally take. Now, I've had psychology colleagues before say that they'll counsel for 30 minutes or like 1 hour and then they're cut off. And these are usually faculty that also do therapy on the side, or maybe therapy full time and teach on the side. And so they actually see that the relationship between those two jobs a little bit more, or as a little bit more appropriate. And so they don't feel like it's unethical to give therapeutic advice. But that to me seems like an awful lot of work that you're not being paid for. So, what type of counseling can you offer? Well, part of the faculty-student relationship isn't just about getting grades and getting a degree and leveraging that degree for a career. It's also about having I think it's about having a good quality of life. And so students choose their major or their career based on metrics generally, like how much money they'll make, how likely they are to get a job. But when they're in the midst of taking the courses, they might learn that, oh, I really liked this elective that I took. I really enjoyed that. What sort of career options are there? When will they have an opportunity to ask that question? Well, possibly in the class that they've taken or that they've enjoyed, meet with those faculty, but also when they're speaking with their advisor. So I see that you've failed statistics 3 times. Maybe a career in accounting isn't going to be a strong one for you. Do you want to change that up at all? And so you're having a question about their career path. But again, you're doing so as a non-expert. And so you're not giving them advice per se. You're saying what's worked, what hasn't worked. If something hasn't worked, what can you do to improve that? And sometimes even you don't seem very happy. You don't seem very excited about this. What is it that drew you to college in the first place? And how can you build back on that? I had one student who was going to double major, not have a minor, but double major, which meant like an extra 30 credits or a full year, possibly more, depending on how many credits she took, in order to double major in, I think, criminal justice and psychology. And so she was seeing me as a psychology student, and I asked her, like, why do you want to do that? And she just wanted to keep her options open. And so I said, well, which job seems the best to you? Or which career path seems most exciting to you? So we talked about options for a psychology degree, options for a criminal justice degree, how they would support each other if you did a minor in one and then a major in the other. And nothing really inspired her. She seemed pretty bored by all of it. Like she was answering questions the way that she ought to answer questions. There was no vigor behind it. There was no life behind it. So I asked her, this was a judgment call. I said, are you interested in any of this? And she was like, I should be. I'm supposed to be. I said, but what do you want to do? Like, what really excites you? And she said, hairstyling. I said, oh, like that's very different than getting like a professional degree, or rather than getting an academic degree and leveraging that for a nice paying career. What experience do you have hairstyling? And we had a conversation about that and what she was really passionate about. And I didn't say, all right, why don't you drop out of school and like pursue hairstyling? And that may be an option for some people. But when she thought about career trajectory and first year income and like or amount that will grow over the years, she decided that it wouldn't be the most prudent decision, but that didn't mean that she would have to rule it out completely. How could she find room in her schedule to let her develop that skill while also developing these other skills in areas of academic interest? And so she decided to not double major. She would do a major and a minor and take overlapping courses together, yet also pursue this passion. And so instead of taking the extra year, she was able to wrap that extra year into pursuing her passion together. And so she was able to do all of them together. I'm not sure how that ended up working out for her, but I thought it was really neat. I feel like I was a catalyst in that process without telling her what to do. And so I just asked her questions and then helped her solve problems through it. I'm very careful not to give specific advice outside of here's the next course that you're slated to take, or here's the next course that you're slated to take. All in all, when you're thinking about the job as advisor or the role as advisor, I find it best to stick with the basics. You have your catalog, you have what students are supposed to do in order to graduate on time, or problems that they'll generally run into. Those are your resources. From using that as a home base, you can engage some of these other personal or career style questions, remembering that, okay, my duty to you or my obligation to you is about being an advisor with respect to the course catalog, with respect to your identity as a student. For a while, I thought my role as advisor was not related to the college or university. In fact, I resented the idea that a manual would tell me what I'm supposed to tell students. And so I wanted to throw out the manual and say, what are you doing here? And like have like an existential conversation with them, and have them decide for themselves what they're really doing there, not realizing that there are a host of competing factors in that. So like pressure from parents, pressure from people that in their hometown, or mentors, lifetime goals that may not be enjoy as much time right now as possible. And so I would ask them really challenging questions about, just forget about this for a while. If you could do anything, like what would it be? And we'd have these conversations about purpose of life and values. And I think there's room for that. And they can be used to support the advising role. But when advising becomes only that, in my opinion, you're drifting a little afield of what the goals are with advising. And so I see my role now as an advisor to be working along with the registrar, working along with financial aid, working along with the curriculum directors and program directors and so on, and then on behalf of students. So I'm there to help them. And again, as a non-expert. What happens when you encounter a problem you do not know how to solve? It's unusual, as a college professor perhaps, to encounter a problem that you don't know how to solve, and you want to say, I don't know. That might make you uncomfortable because your identity as a professor is usually one as an expert. And so if you don't know how to do it, then no one knows how to do it. But that's not true, particularly for the role as an advisor. And I actually don't think it's a bad thing to do in the classroom either. If a student asks a good question, even a question you've thought seriously about, I think it's okay to say, you know what, I'm not sure about that, but here's where I've landed on it, or here's what I would say about it. And then you can engage them in the process of critical thinking, recognizing that you still do it, and you're not infallible when you do it. You're not perfect when you do it. So when you meet with students and they say something like, I was in the military for 3 years, I was told that I should get some physical education credit for that. How do I go about gathering that? And I'll say, oh, I didn't know we offered that. That's really neat, though. I'm excited about that. because I genuinely think that's neat, and I'm genuinely excited about that. So how might I solve that problem? Well, let me go to my university website and type in military benefits to see what's out there. And then I find that there's a military coordinator, a military advisor, someone who works on behalf of former military or part-time military, someone who's taking classes while they're still in the military, can go see this person. So I shoot them an email or give them a phone call, especially if the student's right there. It's nice to give them a phone call and say, hey, I've got a student who's former military. I think you guys should really connect. Quick question for you. Throw it out there, and then say, oh, hey, looks like you can just fill out an application for it and then have your credits applied before you graduate. And so you've solved that problem with the student. You didn't tell them, I don't know, figure it out yourself. But you've also learned the solution to a problem, so when another student brings it up, you've already got that checked. You can say, hey, I know exactly who you need to talk to. Here's the phone number, or I can call on your behalf. That will happen dozens of times every advising period, and pretty soon you'll only have maybe one or two questions you don't know semester to semester. You will have seen all of them. I'm trying to think of the last question that I had. Well, I guess the questions that I have to do with policy changes. So that brings me to another point. Prepare or plan on policy changes. Students need 60 credits for gen eds, or 62 credits for an associate's degree, or 120 credits for a bachelor's degree, or 124 credits for a bachelor's degree. Students can't take these courses in conjunction. Now they can. Policies will change. Excuse me. But those are frustrating. So when you feel like you have it figured out, and then a policy changes, and all of a sudden an old tool is no longer useful. So this tool said that students can choose from these 8 classes. The new tool has 3 courses missing. So now they can only choose from 5 courses to fulfill this area. What about those other courses? And what do students who took them do about it now? And so that'll happen your entire career, I suspect. Find yourself a home in that change. Get used to that change. Don't fight it at that point. It's generally too late to reverse that process. I have a couple of friends or colleagues who are playing a significant role in legislating and advising change, and boy, let me tell you, the amount of work they've had to do over the last 18 months just to get a policy proposed or a reversal policy proposed is incredible. So those are the gears of bureaucracy. It's great to complain about it, but again, the complaining isn't very productive. It, I think, is useful if a student comes in and says, I took this class and now it won't apply to anything, or it's not useful for the degree that I thought it would be useful for. It's great to express outrage if you feel like that's outrageous or you're frustrated by that. I'm upset on your behalf. Like, that sucks. Like, how can they change a policy like that? That's really going to affect you. What do you think we can do about it? And so if I feel like a new policy is unjust, then that's when you use the academic affairs ladder, and you go to your program coordinator, your chair, your dean, possibly vice president of academic affairs or provost, and say, hey, look what happened. What can we do about it? And there are sort of backdoor methods for solving some of those problems, keeping in mind that it's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of effort on everyone's part, but sometimes if it's a particularly egregious and it's not unethical, unfair, or unjust problem, sometimes it's helpful to go to bat for those students. And they recognize that, they realize that, and they understand that, okay, this might not work out in my benefit, but at least I know I will have tried everything. And again, that's something that I think is really important to cultivate in students, that problem-solving mentality, but also the habit of sticking with a problem and trying to see it through to a solution rather than just throwing up their hands and giving up. And so that's in the language of some of the psychology that I study, it's treating that problem not as a child would, but as an adult would, level-headed, rationally, and so on. All right, so here's another problem that students come with. They'll sit down in your office and say, when do I graduate? And so I, I always like run through my head, why wouldn't you figure that out yourself? Like, why do you need me to do that? And that is an unhelpful, possibly critical, and even hurtful response. So I think of those questions as, all right, here's how I would do it, or here's how I would do it. I'm there for them in that capacity, keeping in mind that we're not there to be buddies. I'm there as a liaison to the academic apparatus for these students, and so here's how I would solve that. So I've gotten into the habit of saying, all right, get a piece of paper and a pen or pencil out. Let's figure out how many semesters you have left, or how many courses you have left, and then factor in all the contingencies. And I go through that really quickly. Notice I'm not the one writing that out. The students are doing it. I don't want to take all the work from them, but I also don't want to put all that work on my shoulders. So I get their transcript out, or I get their check sheet, which says all the courses they need, and we go through it. And I say, have you taken this? All right, you've taken this. Or maybe I have their transcript up and I go through, fill it out really quickly, and then I say, all right, let's start counting them. You need to choose 4 courses from this area, 2 courses from this area. You need this sequence, so there's 4 courses. So I just go all the way through it. All right, add up all of those credits, divide by 15, and so about 15 credits per semester, and then divide that number by, divide that number by 2, and that's how many years you have left. But before that, it's how many semesters that they had left. And usually they're really discouraged by that. The reason why they're discouraged by that is because the amount of time it takes to graduate is, on average, at my university, like 6.5, 7 years. Yikes. And actually the majority of students do not graduate. Very low retention rate. But looking nationally, the number is no longer 4 years. It's like 5 years, 5.5 years. You're looking at the average of time it takes for a student to graduate with a 4-year degree. That's really long. Students can graduate in 4 years, but usually it means they've taken a bunch of courses in high school. And I'm sure a lot of students can still graduate in 4 years. I just don't see it hardly ever. If a student does, they've just been killing it all along. They certainly haven't failed a class. But then we go through all those contingencies. The student, they have 7 years before they'll graduate. Well, that's because you failed statistics a couple times. That's because you failed your writing class. That's because you didn't attend your public speaking class. So then we can start to look at, here are the long-term consequences of some of your irresponsible behavior in the first year of your degree, or the first semester possibly. We can look at what they can do to fix that. Again, thinking proactively with them. I don't like wagging the finger at students. They've had plenty of parental advice and admonishment. What I want to do is say, all right, so here's the problem. We understand it. I'm not going to make you feel bad about it. That doesn't help anything. But now it's time to solve that problem. What can we do to put you in a better position moving forward so that the same problem doesn't happen again? And again, from some of the psychotherapeutic literature that I read, transactional analysis, I'm not being their parent. I'm not being, or not indulging their child. I'm speaking with them as an adult to an adult. And so we're having a rational conversation with all of the information that we have, which is the course catalog, what students need to graduate, and then what the student has done to accomplish that. And that's how I've used all of those things together to facilitate my role as an advisor. All right, where does complaining fit in? Expect to hear complaints from students. Expect to hear excuses from students. Going back to what I said a little bit ago, my role is not to be their parent, to wag a finger at them. And sometimes students will want you to do this. It'll be clear because they'll set it up as, look at the big mess that I just made, and they'll want you to punish them for it or criticize them for it. And the psychology behind that has to do with them wanting to have some emotional connection, thinking that the best that they can have is negative, and so that has to do with what their expectations were growing up. And so if you deal with students who come from lower socioeconomic areas, they're minority students, they're used to being criticized in education, criticized possibly by parents, just having a more difficult childhood, they might think that the only engagement you get with an adult or somebody who is in a higher position than you is criticism. And criticism is good. It's better than ignoring somebody. So that they don't want to be ignored. So they come in and they say, I've made a big mess of everything. And it's like they've set you up to say, shame on you. Don't come back here until you've solved that. But that's not really helpful. It's like, okay, well, what's the consequence of that? Wait, you're not punishing me? You're inviting me to think rationally about this? Well, eventually they'll just start thinking rationally about it and say, all right, well, no sense in crying about it longer or complaining about it or being frustrated or trying to get someone else to punish me for it. Let's just work on the solution. So when students complain, if you are irate about what they're complaining about, be irate, be frustrated. Hey, I was told that this course would cover that requirement, and now I'm learning that it isn't. Oh, that's going to set you back some, right? Right? And so like I'm just responding honestly to that. Once the emotion has been expressed, dial it back. What can we do to solve this now? Again, that's one of the most important things to do. You're not the one saying, all right, here's what you have to do. You're maybe saying, here's what I might do, or here are some of your options. The last thing, I've already mentioned, when will I graduate? You might have the question, like, what's my GPA? Usually that's really easy to find. And so a lot of your job as an advisor is going to be doing really, to you, boneheaded actions. Wait, you just need to look up your transcript? Well, let me show you how to do this so that I don't have to do that for you again. The reason why this happens, in my opinion, is that in high school, students are given a schedule. They might even, they log in online and then find out, oh, here's my schedule next semester. In college, they're expecting the same thing. Sometimes there's an advising center that does this. They say, all right, here's your schedule. Yeah, but this isn't my major or something like that. Well, just deal with it. Just kidding. They're used to having someone just solve all of those problems for them or take those steps for them. But then when they come to a faculty advisor, it's really easy to just say, all right, you just want 15 credits? All right, let me register you for them. But I feel like that cripples them. That doesn't help them become their own problem solver. It doesn't let them play a role in that process, so they have no autonomy, which I think is really important, and psychology shows this is really important. And they don't get to develop that skill. They don't feel like they have a role in it, and they're not developing their own competence. So by showing them, all right, so you can find your own transcript, you can find your own GPA, you can register for these classes. It would be on the other side. It would be easy to say, figure it out, and possibly with the right people that might work. But how about I'm going to show you, and then you're going to show me, that sort of thing. So you're making the barrier of entrance into solving that problem really low, and then raising a little bit, and then raising a little bit more, because again, you're not purely liaison on behalf of academic affairs. You're also trying to help these students grow and develop as mature graduates of your university, and you get to play a role in that. So I think that's pretty neat. All in all, I like my role as faculty advisor, but I'm also very stingy with my time. So writing and research and scholarship and planning courses, that's all really important to me. And I don't want anything getting in the way of that. So I schedule my advising time very carefully. And I make sure that when students want to use that advising time, it is theirs to use. When they want to use time outside of what I had set aside, I guard it very carefully. And so sometimes what you'll find is some students want attention around the clock. So they have lots of questions. It's almost impossible to deal with that well, because on the one hand, you want to be available, you want to be helpful, but you also don't want to cripple them, and you don't want to cripple yourself in terms of how much time you're allocating to these students. these specific students. In that case, it may be helpful to find additional resources for the student, see what the university or college has to offer that may help them with these specific problems that they're fielding. Thankfully, I've never had to request a new advisor for a student, but I've gotten very close a few times. And so, and there was no anger or frustration there. It was just, I don't think I'm capable of meeting your needs with the number of advisees that I have and the level of need that you have. I can't give you the number of hours each week that you seem to require. And so I'm going to put in for a change, and maybe you'll find someone who feels about advising how I feel about research, for example. Because again, I'm a lopsided professor. I'm working on that. But I have my goals, I have my interests that are not difficult to devote myself to because they're intrinsic, they're related to my identity. I've integrated them into who I am. And I'm starting to do that with advising, which is why I'm able to, I think, offer a great quality advising to my students. Yet I'm not to the point where I'm going to be up at night and call students first thing in the morning to make sure that they are my first priority. I have my other priorities in terms of my career and then even personal life, and then advising fits down there quite a ways. So it's not one of my strong suits. I'm not trying to say that it is, or I am the exemplar advisor. And maybe one day I'll do an interview with someone who, for whom advising is the most important part of their job. And it'd be really interesting to compare how they do it with how I do it. But what I'm hoping for in this video is for those of you who are starting advising for the very first time and have no idea what to expect, that'll give you a few things to look at, maybe a few skills to begin developing, resources to gather, so that when you meet with that first student, you don't feel bewildered, you feel excited, possibly encouraged, and you'll be able to tie that into your identity as a professor.